I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Cool. All right. Cool, man. I like your background. How do you get it so dark like that? That's great. And you really pop out.
Just black curtains, man.
Wow, good idea.
Our bedroom curtains right behind my office. So.
No, it works great. I mean, it looks like you're in the darkness, or it's dark outside, really dark.
Yeah, it's not.
Which is cool.
We're in Mississippi, so here I can show you. It's pretty bright. Oh, there we go.
Oh wow! No, keep it like that. The dark is good. The dark is really good. Wow. So you're a Sonic Youth fan also? I used to love them.
I'm a musician. I'm into pretty much everything. I'm a big jazz fan. But yeah, Sonic Youth has held my attention since the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I graduated from high school in '89, and I got into punk and hardcore and alternative music when I was in high school, in the late '80s. And I remember seeing Sonic Youth live at this club called the Lost Horizon in upstate New York in Syracuse, where I'm from. And it was a small club, and it was just a really cool and amazing concert. I went with a good friend of mine.
Nice.
Yeah.
I see them live. They opened for Pearl Jam when Pearl Jam played in, I think it was Memphis back in the 90s, but make it to the. And I heard they got booed off stage.
Oh, really? How could they get booed off stage?
I mean, you got to think Pearl Jam fans probably weren't ready for the sort of detuned, noisy.
Right. It was too weird for them.
Yeah, too real.
Yeah, too real. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks, brother. Thanks for coming. I haven't met you in person. I did see you at the Esotericon. I saw your presentation last year, which I liked a lot.
How's your face?
You recognize my face a little bit? Okay, cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right on. And so your name is, you like to be called PD or is it Danny?
I write under PD. You're welcome to call me.
Okay, cool. So, and I don't want to try to summarize your sort of biography or your background for you. So I think a nice way perhaps to start, and I have some questions here, if I can get around my lamp and see them. Let me see here. Is to talk about first, I'd like to know a little bit how you got into Freemasonry. Like what got you interested, and how did that happen?
Well, in the Deep South, Freemasonry is pretty popular. The Scottish Rite was kind of a southern endeavor here in the States, and everywhere in the South, you just see Freemasonry lodges. Masons are prominent about their membership, and I had a couple of Masons in my family, so it's always been something I knew about and was curious about. But to be honest, my initial curiosity was probably more idle. I had no interest in joining. I just wanted to know what was going on with it. Remember, I don't know, I must have been maybe 12, 13 years old, and I was at a friend's house whose grandfather was a Scottish Rite Mason, and I saw a copy of Morals and Dogma on the shelf. And I just remember thumbing through that and thinking, I don't know what the hell this is about, but I want to know what it's about.
Yeah, you want to know. Yeah. That's sort of like Manly Hall's Secret Teaching of All Ages. Have you ever seen that book printed really big?
Yeah.
Like a huge version of it? Oh, my God. That'll get you excited.
Yeah, agreed.
Beautiful book.
Moments of, I'm in way over my head, but hopefully maybe one day I'll understand. I didn't be a Mason at the time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until years later that I got started having my own existential issues, mainly due to the use of psychedelics and the introspection they induced that sort of led me towards mystical traditions like Freemasonry, if you could call Freemasonry a mystical tradition and get away with it.
Yeah. In my book, you can. Yeah. So you've written a lot of books, or 3 books, right?
Two books. I have a third
2 books. Okay.
Only 2. The second one still has yet to be published, but it's forthcoming.
Okay. And of the books that you've written, can you just summarize basically the underlying premise, what the book is called, and what your premise is?
Sure.
Yeah.
Three of them concern the use of entheogenic compounds and plants. And by entheogen, for those listeners who aren't familiar with the term, it is usually applied to what you would call psychedelic plants. The term was coined by Carl A. P. Ruck in his company, a company of authors. And it means that which generates an experience of the divine within. So my primary focus is on the use of these substances within indigenous cultures, but mainly in modern cultures, not cultures. I should say cults. Small circles, secret societies, different initiatory movements where they were used as sort of a rite of passage into a secret group, or even into secret wisdom, if it wasn't necessarily a group setting. But so my first book, Alchemically Stoned: The Psychedelic Secret of Freemasonry, it concerns the ritualized use of Acacia in certain Masonic rites, namely Pyotr Ivanovich Melissino's Russian rite and Alessandro di Cagliostro's Egyptian rite of Freemasonry, wherein they employ the acacia in a blatant entheogenic context where it's being ingested. It's not just a symbol in these instances. It's something that's being taken into the body that is expected to cause certain effects that are named in the ritual. Heightened consciousness and increased bravery is mentioned, increased intelligence, things like that. So yeah, when I first became a Mason, I didn't expect anything psychedelic about it. I was looking for a rite of passage into the other, into the hidden absolute, but yeah, when I found these guys actually using it in an entheogenic context, I thought, well, how did this come about? And I couldn't really answer that in my first book. But my forthcoming book, Angels in Vermilion, it traces this use of the Acacia in Freemasonry all the way back to a Renaissance magician named Dr. John Dee, who was the personal astrologer and advisor to Queen Elizabeth. One second.
That's right. John Dee. Yeah, my just a little anecdotal fact. My I don't know if it's 7th or 8th great grandfather was John Hammond, who was the royal physician of King James.
Yeah,
it was actually John Dee that sort of introduced him into the royal court because they were friends. Yeah. And I read that in John Dee's journal. He had some journal where he mentions a gentleman, Dr. John Hammond, and blah, blah, blah. It was a very short reference, but it was clear that John Dee introduced my grandfather or somehow connected him into the royal court. So he became the royal physician of King James I and his son.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just cool little fact.
Well,
it doesn't make me any cooler, though.
It actually does.
Who I am. Yeah, I wish it did.
The emergence of D into this stuff, I initially had no suspicion that I should be looking in that direction, but what really kind of sealed the deal was Ashmole, Elias Ashmole, an biographer. And for those who don't know, John Dee, he what he's mainly known for is a series of what he called angelic actions. It's recorded in a series of diaries where he had intercourse with angels, communicated with angelic beings that purported to be angels. And he did this with the help of a scribe named Sir Edward Kelly. And Kelly was an alchemist who was in possession of this red powder. And there's several different accounts of how he came into possession of this red powder. but it was Ashmole's suspicion that it was this powder that allowed them to communicate with angels. And that's really what's kind of spawned the research in my new book, Angels in Vermilion. What's so fascinating about it is even back whenever DMT was first being studied, and we bring up DMT because it's the active compound in Acacia, which we hadn't gotten to. When DMT was first being studied by Dr. Rick Strassman back in the 90s, one of the things that he noted was that it induced communication, contact, interaction with what was often termed angelic beings, but they were sometimes called aliens or, different transcendental sort of terms. But in many cases, angels was the interpretation.
Right.
And that's what initially I thought, maybe there is something to this red powder. And it wasn't until Chris Bennett, he wrote a book called Liber 420, that's kind of researches the use of cannabis and other magical herbs in the Western esoteric tradition. But he brought it to my attention that Ashmole, who was a member of the Royal Society and an early Freemason, Ashmole and the Royal Society had published this document called Boyle's Wish List. I say Ashmole published it, Boyle published it. Robert Boyle was one of the founders of the Royal Society along with Ashmole. He wasn't a Freemason, but after Ashmole came to him, Ashmole being Dee's biographer, came to him with this red powder story, and them both being interested in alchemy. Boyle was already searching for this red powder too. So they're both searching for the same thing. And it turns out Boyle is on the trail of this alchemist named Wenzel Saylor, who was in possession of this red powder. And Ashmole's on the heels of Dee and Kelly, who's in possession of this also red powder. And it turns out that, after their whole angelic foray, Edward Kelly becomes the court alchemist for Rudolph II. When Saylor got his powder from an alchemist at the court of Rudolph II. So it turns out that it's the same powder. And this, for Boyle, was just, mind-blowing to them that they're both the same thing. And so at this time, Boyle issues something that's now called Boyle's Wish List. And in 2010, the Royal Society put it on display. There's an article you can find online about it. Just Google Boyle's Wish List. But what it consists of is a series of items that he wants to acquire for the Royal Society to study. And it's filled with references to drugs. He specifically says hallucinogenic drugs. He says he's looking for a specific fungus mentioned by a French author. So he's looking for drugs that cause epileptic fits, pleasing visions and dreams. Right. But he's clearly looking for psychedelic, what we would now call entheogenic drugs. And it's this background that Desaguliers, this man, John Theophilus Desaguliers, who was the third Grand Master of the premier Grand Lodge in London, who actually inserted that Acacia symbol into Freemasonry, according to Dr. David Harris in his research. So, the guy who changed the Master Mason degree forever was already interested in and had come from a background that was investigating psychedelics. So we didn't know this when I wrote my first book, but the picture immediately gets wider. And so that's the basic premise of the second, trying to figure out how the psychedelic compound get into Masonry, and it comes about through alchemy. Right.
Interesting. I mean, I myself have some experience with psychedelics, in the past, especially when I was in college. And in fact, I even had experience when I was 3 years old, which is kind of odd, a little young to be doing that, but that was an accident. It was my dad actually had made some mushroom, like Kool-Aid or something, like tea, and really strong. And he was with my uncle, and I think they were high or something, and they'd smoked pot or they were drinking, and they weren't really paying attention. And I always wanted a sip of my dad's drink, whatever he was drinking. And he would
Of course.
yeah. And so I would like, daddy, sip, sip. You know, I was 3. And so he always thought like little doses of this stuff would make me cool. Even to give me like a toke off his joint or this or that. He was like, oh, the kid's going to be cool, you know? It was kind of funny. Yeah, I know. Don't do this, folks. You know, this is not a show for children today. And so he gave me his glass, and you know, evidently I was thirsty, and it was like, you know, a sweetened drink. So he wasn't paying attention, and I finished it. I finished the whole cup, and that was like a mega dose for like an adult who's very experienced.
Sure.
So he got freaked out, and my mom was there, and he said, "Can you watch him because this is going to be too much for us?" Because I think he was already starting to feel some effects of whatever. And so he and my uncle left my mom with me. And she said it was, you know, one of the craziest experiences of her life, because she was put in a position where she didn't know whether, if she calls the hospital and brings me to the doctor, they might take me away from her for like child abuse, you know, or something. Why are you giving your kid drugs?
Right.
But if she doesn't, then what if something goes wrong, you know, and it's too much for me as a little kid?
Something like psilocybin.
Yeah.
The safest thing you possibly, the psilocybin mushrooms, thing you possibly could have gotten a hold of.
Right. And so she basically said, you know, I asked her about it because I have no recollection of this. I was too young. I said, well, what was I like? What happened? You know, tell me about it. And she said, you know, you would kind of waver between like kind of hallucinating. Like I'd go, Mommy, look at the airplanes. And I'd be seeing like airplanes. She'd go, yes, Jeremy, yes, airplanes, you know, and she'd try to coax me into being happy and stuff. And then as she'd say, I'd go like, Mommy, like something's wrong, you know, something weird is happening. And she said that gave her goosebumps, because it's not, kids at 3 years old don't sense the weirdness of the universe or how something's funny here in this world I'm in. You know, something's not right. That's what these psychedelics often do. They kind of fracture your sense of normal reality and bring you into unexpected spaces and thinking that can frighten people.
At that age where reality isn't even solidified, I imagine. Yeah. It was probably easier to navigate than a 50-year-old man. Yeah.
So she would kind of like try to cheer me up when I'd go negative and say, come on, look at the airplanes, you know, and bring me back. And she said at some point, like I started laughing, and it was so contagious that it made her laugh. And we literally laughed in bed for like 20 minutes, and her stomach was hurting. We could not stop laughing.
That's the best.
Yeah. So, but to make it short, you know, at the end I asked her, you know, hey, did it change me? I mean, how was I after that was over? I mean, that's crazy. And she said, not really. She said, you were always a, you know, very kind of sensitive, kind of a little bit thoughtful kid. And she said, I think it just made you more so after that. You just got more into whatever you were more of that after that. So it is interesting. But
Maria, she took real young, you know, the woman who, she was a Mazatec curandera. She's the one that provided Wasson and eventually Leary, I believe, with psilocybe mexicana, I think is what she. But when she first took them, her grandfather, I believe, was a curandero, and she had seen him eat them and sought them out herself. Her and a cousin or a sister, at age, I believe, around age 7, and ate several specimens and were found crying, hallucinating in the woods, and
wow.
You know, so similar story.
Yeah. And I guess the reason why I talked about that is just sort of, you know, for transparency and disclosure. Like I can relate, you know, to some of your experiences. Sure. In fact, I tried it again in college, and the first time I tried it after I was 3 was in my sophomore year in college at Boston University. And I was Mr. Philosophy. I was into, you know, philosophy. I was studying psychology. I wanted to know the answers to life, but I was kind of an agnostic. You know, I had no real religious type or spiritual beliefs at all. Well, after that night of taking an 1/8 of mushrooms, that was all changed. And the next day I was at the library looking for books on what happened to me. And I came across Aldous Huxley, The Doors of Perception. This was in 91. And I sensed in that book something about what I experienced. And then it kind of moved from there to Ram Dass and all kinds of kind of spiritual books. And there was a bookstore in Harvard Square I used to go to, like a really good kind of New Age bookstore, but it was a little more on the serious side of New Age, like for the real kind of scholarly New Age folks. They had a great library. And I was just there every weekend buying books, and I just totally got into mysticism and things like that. And that was because of psychedelics.
Yeah, it's once it starts, you're on fire for it. You're just
That's
reading
it. Yeah, I'll never be the same since that time. And that's why, you know, a lot of people that have an aversion to this, and they think, oh, this sounds like drugs, and how could you talk about drugs in relation to Freemasonry or something like that? And I know you get a lot of that slack. I'm sure you do.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah. People have to realize that traditionally, for thousands of years, these were spiritual medicines. These are plants.
Sacraments.
It's not some kind of chemical were made in a factory. This is not a pill necessarily, unless you get into LSD, that's different. But you know, a lot of these things are plants, and they're natural, and they have always traditionally been used in deep the spiritual initiatic ceremonies, and it's still being used today. And some of these, you know, Amazonian tribes and Native Americans still carry these traditions.
And one of the points Jamie Paul Lamb makes in the introduction he wrote for my newest book, Angels in Vermilion, is that, you know, at the time, this is the 18th century.
Right.
There is no war on drugs. There is no real concept of addiction outside of alcoholism and maybe some knowledge of opium addiction.
Right.
And that's been basically minimal at the time. So in the effects of those drugs are so different than what we're talking about. The visionary, illuminating, transcendent aspect of these drugs would only have been interpreted by men in this time frame as being apocalyptic, revelatory. It wouldn't have been a drug to them. It would have been the philosopher's stone. It would have been a mystical substance causing visions that I guarantee for them would have been on par with Daniel or John of Patton or Ezekiel. You know, it was they were seeing for the first time what the prophets and patriarchs were telling them about in the scriptures. It was in their face, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For them, I think it would have been just an absolute novel discovery that they really wouldn't have known what to do with it. And it was, you know, probably only discussed in hushed tones, mouth to ear, you know, initiatory kind of settings. And we don't see that today, of course. While we are kind of experiencing a psychedelic renaissance of sorts, you know, we're not seeing these traditions that maybe once had ties to these plants return to them. And like Freemasonry, I don't think we should. I think I've said this before, but probably the most terrifying thing I can think of is a room full of Masons tripping on DMT. This would be absolute chaos. We have no setting for that in our culture to allow for what take place once all those changes.
Some people may not be ready for that experience. That might not be good for them.
Right. You know? And then we're so far detached from anything sacred. Everything is so modernized and reduced to a materialistic brush away that we're not prepared, I don't think, to discuss some of the things that take place in those states. And you know, getting there, but no, I think a lot of the ritual, I hate to use the term, but dumbed down maybe is the right way. Dumbed down over time, made more mainstream, more palatable, for, you know, making things more practical and less mystical and deep and profound. Whereas I think, you know, older secret societies and initiatic traditions, where the profundity was more prominent in the ritual experience. And it was probably also more of a transformative experience than you get today. I mean, you can go through a lot of Freemasonic rituals today and not really feel very changed afterwards. I don't think that's what it's supposed to be. I think an ideal ritual you would go through and it would give you almost an experience as if you've taken a psychedelic. It would give you some kind of revelatory experience, some kind of new insight That's one
that
of the
would
points
really
taken.
change you inside.
There are really
Ideally.
two different types of initiation. You have
Yeah.
formal initiation, which is what we see in initiatory societies today, where you're put through a ritual that has seeds within it that are planted that, if they're inculcated, might result in illumination or enlightenment.
That's right. That's right.
Like,
if they're inculcated.
And then it still, it might not click for you. It's just some people it doesn't click for them.
Yeah. They're not paying attention. They don't care.
You have what I call actual initiation, as opposed to actual initiation. Not all actual initiates have been formally initiated, just like not all formal initiates will ever attain actual initiation. But the initiation is that aha moment, that revelatory, life-changing sort of click that takes place under proper settings. And I think that's really how psychedelics came into play in Masonry. The DMT came into play in Masonry, was to say, how can we make these two initiations occur and coincide in one and the same moment? And the way to do that is psychedelics. It's how they did it at Eleusis, at the Telesterion, how they turned out thousands of initiates at a time, every one of them having glimpsed something that changed them for life. How do you do that so consistently in that number of people? We don't see that with Masonry. We see more people not come back.
That's right.
Change.
Yeah, I mean, and I think also some of the bad rap that psychedelics have gotten partly has to do with them being called hallucinogens. And a lot of people that have never taken them, they hear a whole hallucinogen. That means he's seeing things that don't exist, and that's how they see it. Is, oh, he's got, he's crazy. He's just visioning, seeing things that don't exist. Why would that be interesting to anybody that's intellectual or a reflective man of reason? So that word I have a problem with, particularly me, because I've taken psychedelics and strong doses, but I've never had a hallucination. I've never saw like visions and stuff, but what it's done for me is it's given me insights and revelation. So it's made my mind think things differently, think about the world and reality differently, think about make observations about life and reality that I never would have had before. Major aha moments, from these experiences. And to me, that's what these medicines are really about. It's about that depth of experience, that transformative experience, and making connections where you never saw them before, which is so much what Masonry is supposed to be about.
Right. Yeah. And let's talk about those terms for a minute.
Yeah.
Hallucinogen, psychedelic, and entheogen. They're pretty much used interchangeably, but you hit on a good point. Any of one of these plants could be any one of those three things. A hallucinogen, like you say, is something that's going to make you hallucinate. It's not there. It's
pretty colors. Wow. Look at the rainbows. Mommy, look at the airplane. But
the word psychedelic, on the other hand, carries heavy psychological connotations because it means mind manifesting. So it's like it's almost saying at one level, one of these plants could be a hallucinogen and just make you hallucinate. At another level, it might help you get into deeper corners of your psyche that otherwise you may never have penetrated. But on a third level, entheogen, the divinity aspect that seems to somehow transcend both of those others. It's not a hallucination. It doesn't appear to be contents of my mind. It certainly isn't a product of my past, memory. And it answers to this third. So any one of these drugs, LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, could be a hallucinogen, a psychedelic, or an entheogen. What's makes that is the person coming to the table. Your mind. We read about the parable of the tilled soil, the seed that falls on tilled soil will produce fruit, that kind of thing. Depending.
Interesting.
Not saying that some people aren't worthy of an entheogenic experience. It's just saying that at their current capacity, they're going to be hallucinatory or mind manifesting territory.
Right. And I guess that's why there's some people, I've known people like this in the past who could take things like LSD or shrooms and watch a movie or or just have some beers with their friends. I'm like, are you crazy? How can you do that? For me, I'm afraid of these plants because I know the type of powerful experience that they can give me.
Right.
And so I would rarely approach one. And I mean, there's some that I'm super afraid of, like ayahuasca. It scares the shit out of me. I've never tried it. And part of me was curious, but I'm so scared because I know how sensitive I am to these plants.
Well, that's how you should approach it.
Yeah.
Not fear, but with, reverence, respect. Because
Oh,
that's
yeah.
what
It's serious shit. It's not a joke.
It's not the plant you're respecting. It's yourself.
Right.
It's yourself. There's no visions in that plant. There's no God in that plant.
Interesting.
You're respecting your own capacity for states that.
Oh, I'm telling you. Yeah. I mean, it brings up everything. All those hidden thoughts of the what is it? Jung calls it the dark. In your unconscious, there's he calls it something. The dark. Anyway, the dark side, or the hidden realms of your mind. Let's say, right?
The shadow elements.
The shadow. Thank you. The shadow elements. All that stuff comes to the surface. Fear can come out. Intense fear. I've been through that. Where you have a so-called bad trip.
Yeah.
And boy, once you get in that rabbit hole, it's hard to pull yourself out. And it can be the worst thing ever. Very frightening experience because you might think you're losing your mind, for example. And that's a strong fear when you have the fear of like, am I going to go crazy or am I going to die from this experience? And once you get into that mode, it's really, you need a good guide that can help you come out of that, I think.
Most of us believe from moment to moment that we're the same the same individual. There's this illusion of persistence of self from moment to moment. But in psychedelics, that doesn't always happen. There's gaps, and then those gaps.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's gaps.
There is no self. There is no, there's some modern research that's being done right now. Brain scans of people on placebo and folks on LSD and psilocybin. And what it's showing is that where we previously thought these drugs were kind of causing a lot of electrical firing, waking everything up sort of, what it's really doing is in the center of the brain, there's this area called the default mode network. And that's where our sense of self comes from, our ego. Our ego doesn't reside there, but that's the best way to kind of explain it.
Interesting.
Self is there, and what it looks like these scans is an area of static, of constant information. Well, people on psychedelics, that static goes quiet, it silences, so their sense of self is quiet, it's gone for a second. Now what that allows for is portions of the brain then are allowed to communicate across that default mode network that otherwise remained at a perpetual distance. That's what causes the creativity, the problem solving, the artistic imagination, and like you said, connections being made that have never been made before.
Exactly.
Well, our gray matter are communicating that have never communicated before. The side of that is it's happening because the default mode network is silent, which means no self, no sense of self, ego death.
That's really interesting.
For some people is absolutely unacceptable state of being.
I know. Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, so you're in this little ball in the middle of your brain, your sense of personality and who you are in a certain habituatory mode of thought. You have your thought patterns, and we're unconscious of a lot of this stuff. And when you take these types of entheogens, it breaks you free of that. And that can be frightening because you're going to sense and think and feel things you never felt and thought before. So you really have to be ready for this kind of experience. And I'm sure you would probably agree that being in nature is probably the best place to be in a nice day, rather than in the city and locked up in some closet or something.
Nature, but as far as this stuff takes us inward, I mean, we could be anywhere. Ideally,
anywhere.
A consequence-free environment. Normally, that would mean nature. But nature can be full of consequences. If there's a body of water nearby,
lion approaches,
a cliff,
oh my God.
Like you want to, I try and think in terms of consequence-free. Is going to roll on me when I'm not in a position to explain what I'm doing here.
Right. No, that's true. Yeah. Probably don't want to take it at a police station.
Right. You know,
That's not really consequence free right there.
Right. But I mean, this, you know, it really is kind of, you've heard the set and setting argument, you know,
Yeah.
if you're having a rough time, I mean, everyone who's experimented with this stuff has had a difficult experience. And
Yeah, sure.
the way to navigate that is set and setting. That's largely
Yes.
what the ritual was for, was to navigate and
Yes.
stayed on a steady course. People who sit down and drop this stuff and turn on TV, you don't want TV to be your ritual. You don't want that to steer you, and that's terrifying to me, to be putting yourself in someone's hands that isn't even prepared for you to be in their hands in that state. But you put yourself in a ritual. You can ritualize it yourself. You don't have to have friends ritualize it. You know, you take a shower, you clean your house, do the dishes, make sure nothing interrupts. Put on clothes that have a personal significance to you. If you're trying to recall, you know, a mental state you had, maybe you have writer's block and you want to be a writer again. You know, put on what reminds you of that. Pull out your typewriter. You know, so that's ritual. Ritual is a lot of things. It doesn't be candles and incense. It can be something as simple as just preparing a space for creativity, you know. But
exactly. These are not recreational drugs. These are entheogenic plant medicines.
Yeah. I like to say sacraments. I try not to say medicines because I feel like it implies something's wrong. And you don't have to have something wrong to take it. You know, you can be in perfect
okay, cool. That's a good nuance.
And still be able to take a sacrament. But if you're saying a medicine, I feel like it's like planting a little seed of what are we healing today? And I don't like that.
I got you. Yeah, no, sacrament's even more positive. I like that. It's good to have a 100% positive outlook on these plants and reverence and awe.
I agree. And in the West, you know, one of the problems we have is anything that has the potential to induce a sense of the sacred or numinous, it's like the best we can do with it is make it a therapy. You know, how can I put this in massage parlor or
right.
That kind of thing is like
it demeans it. It demeans the experience.
And it demeans is what it does.
Yeah.
We should be able to do that.
I agree. I totally agree. So let's see. I have some other thoughts that we might want to explore. So, okay, the idea that, you know, acacia used to be in some of the early rituals of Freemasonry, but it was talked about as acacia. It was written as acacia and not acacia. And you say that, well, that refers to this cinnamon-like plant that comes from China. And then you know, sometime in the 1700s, it got switched to acacia, which is this plant where its root actually has some DMT in it that can induce this entheogenic experience. But my question is, are we sure that even acacia wasn't acacia? Because you know how things have different spellings. I mean, why would they be referring to some cinnamon twig?
Right. Well, cassia does appear in the Bible. It appears they're talking about embalming because they're putting spices in the body. And it does appear in the temple incense and oil, which you see also in what they call a bromelain incense and a bromelain oil, where they use cinnamon and cassia. So there is a biblical precedent for cassia.
Interesting.
But if you look at any of the rituals prior to de Sagulié's stint as Grand Master at the Premier Grand Lodge in London, every single expose says cassia. Now, the thing about cassia is when you extract oil from acacia, they call it cassie, C-A-S-S-I-E. So that's already phonetically close. And then there found another example from the 1600s, from the 1700s, from the 18th century, referring to Acacia farnesiana, but they call it Farnesian cassia. So there's already this ambiguity about the term. And if you look up the term in Mackey's encyclopedia, you know, he argues that it's because people were largely illiterate at the time, and there was a habit of syncing any word of which the initial syllable was constituted with an A was immediately dropped from that word. And so acacia would become cassia. You know, so it's perfectly arguable that that's the case. But if that's the case, then it was there from the very beginning.
Right.
And
Right.
that or was it being used in an entheogenic context, or
Right.
did these people just come along and figure it out and say, oh, we could trip on this, let's make that part of the ritual, and then it didn't become explicit until Cagliostro and Melissino? There's still a lot of unanswered questions with this stuff.
Fascinating. I mean, are you a Knight Templar by any chance? Are you in commandery?
Both York Rite and Scottish Rite.
Okay. So, in many traditions throughout history, there's been wine as part of the ceremony. I wonder if some of these traditions, which now is just regular wine, may have came from, some ancient rite where you actually drink a concoction of some kind that could have wine in it, honey, wine, different things, herbs, plants, who knows what.
You look at the historical precedents of people that are drinking out of skull cups the way that it's done in those rituals. They're drinking Amrita, Soma. You see it with Vajrayana Buddhists. You see it, the Agoris, the Shiva worshipping Agoris.
That's right. They do it. Yeah.
They call them Kapalas. And, Soma, Amrita, these are terms that specifically refer to drugs. Yeah. Soma was a drug. It's really mentioned.
They would pee it out, then they drink their pee to, get more effect.
That's one of R. Gordon Wasson's big things. He thought it was Amanita muscaria mushrooms,
right?
Because the muscimol isn't metabolized. But Chris Bennett makes a hell of an argument for cannabis and his cannabis and Soma solution. I would reading, if you're going to read the Wasson, definitely read Bennett. So you'll get a fair picture.
So
but they definitely using something in an entheogenic context out of a skull cup, and that's the historical precedent for it. And I'll tell you something else that's interesting is in Greek myth, when Perseus killed Medusa, John Menelaus, who was a chronographer, he documented this one tradition in Greece that said that he then used the Medusa's head as a cup to teach the Halma rite to the Persians. Halma is the Persian analog to Soma. There's about what Halma it was. Was it cannabis? Was it pagan? But again, this clear, and this isn't in the East. This is the use of a skull cup to transmit the Halma rite, a specifically entheogenic rite, to the Median priesthood.
Wow, and there's so much symbolism in the idea of sort of drinking out of a skull. I mean, especially if it's an entheogen. I mean, it's you're drinking of your own mind in a way.
Right.
What's inside the skull, right? The brain.
Yeah, you've seen the cup of Corpus Hermeticum, where it says that the deity sent down a cup of mind so that anyone could baptize themselves with the cup that wanted, and then it says that those who did could reascend to him who sent down the cup of mind. Immediately made me think of those rituals.
And then obviously the death and regeneration, death as a symbol with the skull. Like you said, this sort of death of the ego that you're going to go through in this experience. You're going to transcend beyond that limited perception and get a taste of the divine. Or
at least the
what?
The other. When we talk about, it's easy to say the divine, but there's so much weight when we're talking about that.
It's true. Yeah.
I just like to say the other. It's something else that's apparently not.
Or the beyond.
That's a good one too.
The beyond. Because there's definitely a beyond out there.
But something.
There's a lot of beyond that people have no idea about.
I've also been reading a lot of Dan Merker lately, and he's a stickler for that. He says, before you assume you're experiencing the ultimate ground of all being, make sure you're not experiencing the ground of your own being. It might be just profound to us, might seem divine.
Right. Well, like even the term God, I mean, I kind of prefer calling God the great mystery.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And in the fourth way, Gurdjieff system, they call it X. They just call it X.
Or in Kabbalah, they say Ein Sof, something so beyond our comprehension. Nothing can be said of it.
Limitless.
Limitless, yeah. So anyway, getting back to Acacia specifically, I mean, are there any traditions today that you're aware of that use Acacia as an entheogen still today? Any tribes out there that are using some form of Acacia?
So Acacia is a classification that gets moved
Right.
around. Like Mosa and Adenanthera, all of these used to be Acacia. Whenever Dioscorides, he was a Greek physician, when he named Acacia what he named it akakia, which means thorns. He was naming it after its most defining characteristic because they are thorny as hell. If you see a honey locust, Gladitsia triacanthos, covered in thorns, looks just like an acacia, has the same it's not bipinnate, it's pinnate compound leaf structure. Acacia has bipinnate compound leaf structure, but all of them virtually look the same. They have that mimosa-looking weeping branch structure with legume seed pods and often have thorns all over them. So what we call acacia today, back then would have included mimosa species and Adenanthera species, Gladitsia species. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So while there's no cultures that are using acacia for its psychedelic compound, for its psychedelic constituents that I know of, they are using Mimosa hostilis, which is called Jurema preta in Brazil, where they use it in an ayahuasca-like kind of setting. There's also an Adenanthera colubrina and an Adenanthera peregrina, two species of tree that grow in and around the Caribbean, from which they make a snuff called yopo or a pina, and they prepare that from the seed pods themselves because they're so rich in DMT. The DMT isn't always in the roots. Sometimes it's in the seeds, sometimes it's in the flowers, sometimes it's in the leaves.
Oh, wow. It varies, huh?
In the case of most of the acacia and mimosa, it's in the roots. Mimosa hostilis, Acacia confucia, Acacia senegal, all actually I
All in
think
the
Senegal
roots.
leaves. But yeah, all that's in the roots. But so
Wow. Well,
question,
akakia, right? That's what it was originally called, akakia, or it comes from the thorns.
right.
Well, is it Kykeon or Kakian that was drunk in the Eleusinian mysteries?
I've never thought about that, but there may
Yeah,
be an
I'm just
element.
thinking that now.
Yeah, Kykeon was what was consumed at the Ocean.
Kykeon.
That's right. I'll give that
Yeah.
a shot. That's interesting.
Yeah, maybe there's
Kykeon,
a connection. Hey, add
yeah.
it into your book.
I'll cite you too.
All right, man. Jeremy from Just Masons. Yeah. So, okay. So the other question I wanted to ask you about, if you're cool talking about it, I know you. I watched the TMR episode where you were on, and I believe you mentioned quickly in passing that you had taken a strong dose of acacia, which you said if even though you don't have an inhibitor, a MAO inhibitor, which is normally used in combination with DMT, so that it can have an effect on you. But you found out that if you do anything with the DMT in large enough doses, you could overwhelm the stomach and it'll absorb or whatever. So you said
Overwhelmed
you did that?
place in
You
the
tried
stomach.
that? Was that the acacia root you tried?
So it was the idea was given to me by an alchemist named Eric J. Laporte, who he owns or co-owns a Ayurvedic / alchemy supplement company in India or Thailand.
Okay.
I'm not completely sure where his base of operations is, but he got in touch with me and said that he had found a way to produce the elixir sans the monoamine oxidase inhibitor. For those listeners who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, when you take DMT normally, there's a compound in your gut called monoamine oxidase, and this stuff eats it up, burns it up before it can ever pass the blood-brain barrier, so you never get to have the psychedelic experience that it otherwise would elicit. But if you consume a monoamine oxidase inhibitor with or prior to the consumption of the DMT, then it allows the DMT to bypass that and get into your bloodstream, after which you have the experience. So the idea that you could, and I should say that most of the negative experiences you hear about with ayahuasca are from the monoamine oxidase inhibitor, the diarrhea, the vomiting, most of that in the MAOI. The DMT doesn't do all that.
Okay.
You might vomit on DMT, but it's more from the absolute energy rushing through your stomach than it is from just
Wow.
plain nausea. But so yeah, when he brought it up that he had figured out a way to do it without it, I was skeptical, but he told me to just take enough to overwhelm the gut. Well, I didn't know how much that was, so we started with 10 grams. We moved up to 25 grams, and
Was this in a powdered form? How were you taking it? Or did you make a tea of the root or what?
made tea with the roots. That's right. Froze the roots to get them
Uh,
extra brittle. You powder it and make a tea with it, strain it out.
was it red? Was it a red powder?
It's red, purple. Yeah.
Wow,
It
interesting.
crimson, vermilion, which is
Yeah.
why I chose that.
Vermilion. Yeah.
Definitely has that crimson vermilion color to it. Royal, purple, red color.
Interesting. Okay.
And yeah, I definitely got an experience. I didn't get an experience anywhere near what I've gotten taking ayahuasca, but
Yeah.
I'm certainly having a DMT experience off
Oh,
of
really?
but he was right.
So it wasn't just like a mild, like a euphoria, like maybe I feel
Yes,
something. It was a clear experience, or no?
it was clearly DMT I was feeling. No, it wasn't
Oh,
vision
wow.
enough to have a full on breakthrough experience, but
Right.
it was definitely causing an effect, which before that, every book you read says otherwise, says it won't do a damn thing.
Right.
So
Mm.
that was
And
our
that's
first.
just using it straight without the MAO inhibitor, like another plant like Syrian rue added
Right,
to the mix.
right.
Why
And
not try it like that? Why not try it with an MAO inhibitor?
well, when you mix the MAOI with it, you use drastically less DMT, but you're
Right.
going to do that nausea. And it doesn't always cause nausea. There are ways. Dosage is important. What you're using, Syrian rue is notorious for making you sick. Banisteriopsis copy, the same. I prefer the passion flower, Passiflora incarnata. It grows all over Mississippi. It takes close
Okay.
to 25 grams instead of 3 to 5 grams of the Syrian rue seeds, but nowhere near as hard on the stomach.
So have you tried the passion flower with the acacia root?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so did it suddenly work, like
It works great.
strongly?
Yeah, it works just like ayahuasca. You can
Are you
take here.
kidding me? Wow.
We've got honey locusts that grow around here, Gladitsia triacanthos. If you look in Trout's book, Some Simple Tryptamines, he notes that I think he was able to pull 1% DMT from the total weight of the root.
Right.
So we experimented with that and had some results. We tried Acacia farnesiana, which it's different because the only DMT in there is 5-MeO DMT. There's very little in DMT, so not a very visual experience, but very, very physical. And we didn't take enough to have the full-on what we call white room experience, the penthouse experience, but definite DMT flash from that too.
Wow.
So it's going to be a lot of experimentation. We call it misahuasca, and it works. It's you read Benny Shannon. He's a professor of psychology at Hebrew University in Israel. He wrote this paper called Biblical Entheogens, a Speculative Hypothesis. And he basically says that in the same region where Moses was having his visions, Paganum harmala and Acacia grew in that same area. And theoretically, they could have been combined to produce a brew virtually indistinguishable from ayahuasca that would have caused visions on par with what Moses was experiencing. So that's his speculative hypothesis. And I'm looking around in my backyard like, well, we got passion flower right here and we've got locust right here. Should I be speculating that the Chickasaw were tripping on some kind of form of ayahuasca here in Mississippi? Who knows?
Potentially.
But it's possible. We're now.
So, the other thing that I thought was interesting is this whole connection with Osiris and Acacia.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about in the myth there that Osiris was living in the acacia tree.
He gets encased inside of it. His brother, Typhon. There's three
inside of it, yeah.
Osiris, Typhon, and Isis. They're brothers and sisters. And Osiris is marrying Isis. They're a couple. But Typhon is the older brother, and he says, I have a right to marry her. But she's in love with Osiris. And there's other versions of the story too, where she's actually in love with Typhon, and there's several different myths. There's lots of dynasties, long time for these myths to change.
Yeah.
And there's even another version from the 19th dynasty about two brothers named Anpu and Bata, who are fighting over a woman. Same story, gets chopped up, put in the Nile.
Right.
There's different versions, but the one we're talking about that concerns us is Typhon tricks his brother. He builds this beautiful box out of acacia wood, and says that, and he builds it exactly to the specifications of Osiris's body, like a coffin. And he presents it at this dinner party and says that anyone who can fit in this luxurious box that I've carved and gold plated will win it as a trophy. And Osiris is like, I'll fit in there, And so he lays down, and Typhon closes the lid, encases him in it, and throws him off in the Nile River, and goes to marry Isis. Well, Isis, she's not having any part of Typhon. She eventually gets the help of, some versions say Anubis, later versions actually say Hermes, but she gets the help of another psychopomp type deity to help her get the coffin back. But she can't find it at first. It gets wrapped up in the roots of another tree. So when they find this out, Typhon chops this tree down and chops it down into planks and puts all the planks in the water. So now Osiris has been chopped into pieces, and she needs to gather up all of his missing pieces, and she's going to use magic to bring him back to life. And she gathers everything except for his phallus, and she has to make a magical phallus out of acacia wood, by which she then is able to conceive Horus, who avenges Osiris's death by killing his uncle Typhon, etc. But
there's a lot in there. There's a lot in there, man.
Yeah, wow. With the idea of the deity being encased inside of the tree, there's a definite sort of something's being communicated there.
Yeah, I mean, why is acacia wood so prominent and special, and so many really deep components of religion and spirituality? I mean, you got to connect it with Osiris. You got to connect it with the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant itself was supposed to be made of acacia wood with gold, right?
Shittim wood is acacia wood. That's right.
Yeah. What else in the Bible was acacia? I forgot. Was it just the Ark?
I don't know if you've read Albert Pike's lecture for the Master Mason degree, his version for the Scottish Rite, but he basically says, he says Christ's crown of thorns was acacia thorns, that the cross was from acacia, and he might be making this up. He might be pulling it from older traditions. I know there are several traditions about different trees for the cross and the crown of thorns, but I think I've even read that gopher wood was a reference to acacia at a different point, and gopher wood is what Noah's Ark was made out of. So,
oh wow, interesting. So let's see. Let's get a little esoteric here. I mean, not that this isn't already esoteric, right? But this whole idea of the primal matter, or I think it's materia prima or prima materia. The idea of the cubical ashlar and salts and crystal salts being cubes, and how this connects to DMT and alchemy.
Sure.
There we go.
So
that's a juicy one, right?
Yeah, and that's a big. When alchemy first came about, it was primarily concerned with what they called tincturing metals, so dyeing metals, and this was done by Egyptians in the Egyptian priesthood. We see this from Zosimos of Panopolis. And the reason the dyeing of the metals was so important was because of, I'm sure you've seen Jacob Burma's philosophy, where he talks about signatures. Well, they had a similar idea that certain colors corresponded to certain deities, and your ability to tincture metals, these colors, is what predicated the spirit of that deity inhabiting that statue in the temple. So it was a highly guarded secret. But as these texts
You
fell
got
into
chew? Are you doing chew or something?
do what?
You do chew? Is that chew or?
No, I'm just
Oh,
drinking
okay.
water.
Oh, okay.
But so as these temple texts about metallurgy fell into the hands of people who weren't metallurgists, weren't priests, and had no idea what they were reading, over time, alchemy became something else. It became concerned with something different. And especially by the time we get to European alchemy in and around the 13th century, we really start to change, and it's incorporating plants, not just metals. They're really concerned with the all of nature, but essentially plants. And by the time we get to Paracelsus or Paracelsus in the 16th century, the focus is almost 100% on plants, on what he calls spagyrics. So the basic philosophy of alchemy, the way it developed, it carried a lot of the same lingo, but they came to mean different things. So by the time we get to Cagliostro in the 18th century, alchemy is a very specific thing, and it's a very specific process. And what their concerns were threefold. They want to know, what is the prima materia, meaning the first matter, meaning what the thing that I have to make the philosopher's stone. They want to know, how do I produce the philosopher's stone from this prima materia? And they want to know then, how do I apply the philosopher's stone once I have it? All of this mystery, because nobody was talking clearly about it, and everybody who was experimenting with it was very much doing it themselves, a DIY, trying to figure this stuff out. Very rarely did you have a master communicating this stuff to a student, and when they did, it was what they had figured out, not because of these long traditions people talk about. There's no unbroken lineage of alchemical masters. It is a mess when you start really looking at all the texts, all the solutions. It's a mess.
But everyone was kind of freely exploring and experimenting on their own in a way. And there was some sharing.
Particular streams who have certain answers. This stream is the one that I'm outlining in Angels in Vermilion, but it basically comes to fruition with people like Cagliostro. But so for them, they determine that the prima materia is the acacia. They say it in the rituals. The prima materia of the philosophers and the alchemists is nothing but that sprig of acacia you received in the matter.
Okay, good. This is perfect. Can we segue into the reading of that quote from the Egyptian rite?
You have
Cagliostro? Do you have it?
I don't have it in front of me.
I can read it. You want me to read it?
Go for it, yeah.
So this is from Cagliostro's Egyptian rite. This is from one of your articles that you sent me, which shows without a doubt that an elixir of acacia has indeed been employed in an entheogenic alchemico-masonic context in the past. So this is a quote from the ritual, I guess. The acacia is the primal matter, and the rough ashlar or mercurial part which has been purified. It becomes cubical. It is thus that you may bring about the marriage of the sun and the moon, and that you shall obtain the perfect projection. Quantum sufficit, et quantum appetit. The candidate shall drink the red liquor placed upon the master's altar thereby, raising his spirit in order to understand the following speech, which the worshipful master shall address to him at the same time. This is where it gets interesting. My child, you are receiving the primal matter. Learn that the great God created before man this primal matter, and that he then created man to possess it and be immortal. Man abused it and lost it, but it still exists in the hands of the elect of God. And from a single grain of this precious matter becomes a projection into infinity. The acacia, which has been given to you at the degree of master of ordinary masonry, is nothing but that precious matter. And Hiram's assassination is the loss of the liquid which you have just received. That's powerful.
Right. Yeah. Pretty intense.
Yeah.
and it's clear that they're drinking something. And there's a footnote I don't include in the article, but in the actual ritual, there's a little asterisk that says that for lodges who can't get a hold of the actual prima materia, that they can substitute red wine. So we know that he wasn't just drinking wine, and it was symbolically something else, like we see with the bitter cup, for example, in the temple ritual, maybe. But yeah, so he's saying that the Prima Materia is the acacia, and from it we produce a cubical stone. He using Masonic language, saying we produce the perfect ashlar. That is that salt crystal that's produced.
Which is technically, is it a cube? The salt crystal is cubical, right?
They can be. They can be. But if you produce it crudely, they're not. But you can put it back together, what they call rewash it, and get a nice solid crystal out of it. But it's not a cube, although it is a salt whenever you produce it in one way. You can produce it as a base or a salt. So you see salt language show up frequently in these rituals where they call it a salt. Now, they're taking that extra step. I don't think so, because so that cubical language about the cubical ashlar, Cagliostro, he's using it in a very particular way. He's saying it comes from the primal matter. Melusino has a totally different thing going on. He's saying he's using the salt to get the stone out of the primal matter. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with alchemy.
Just a bit, but not just super familiar, but a bit.
Well, Paracelsus has this technique that he came up with called the primum ens technique. Primum ens means first entity, the premium entity of a plant. And it's a means of extracting something out of a plant. And what you do is you take a caustic menstruum, caustic meaning base, not acid. And you get it to a pH such that it will unhook the alkaloids from the plant matter. It's in the same way that
it'll draw them out.
In the same way that alcohol would, in a simple extraction, But they would use this. It's called lixuvium, and it's what Paracelsus would put on the base. And so after soaking it in this stuff and then straining it out, he would have this solution that was caustic. You can't drink it, but it's got the DMT in there. How do you get it out? He would take ether and pour it on the top. We, in modern DMT production, they do the same thing. They get using caustic soda, they get the right pH, put the acacia in there, strain it out. They pour naphtha on top. Naphtha is lighter fluid. The reason you have to use naphtha is because they call it a magnet. It's got to be a non-polar solvent, and it also has to evaporate clean. Well, for example, vegetable oil is a non-polar solvent, but it's never going to evaporate. It'll just go rancid. So you have to pick one that will evaporate clean and leave behind nothing but the crystals, the philosopher's stone, the DMT. So he was using ether, but he would pour this ether on the top and it would float on there like oil on water. And it slowly absorbs all of those DMT alkaloids. And they go. That's how you get the DMT out now.
Wow.
And so when you do this, Paracelsus has his students doing it with lemon balm to train them. He tells them, you can do it with anything, but he's teaching them how to do it with lemon balm. Melusino, he takes the extra step and says, that's just training. This is the real shit, the acacia. That's to learn how to do this with the acacia. So when you do it with lemon balm and you pour that ether on top, as all that essence of lemon balm gets sucked up into it, it turns green, emerald green. Looks emerald on top of it. So when Melusino says to his people, he says, well, without this salt, we can't extract anything. He says, that's the sea of the philosophers. That's what he calls it. He says this is
the green one, the green layer?
The caustic layer. That's the sea of the philosophers that the Prima Materia be put into to be digested. Then he says, but without the layer of greenish foam is what he calls it on top, he says we can do nothing. We can't get it out. It's useless. That's how we know that Melusino is using that Prima Mens technique, because he's got it floating on top, and that's how you suck the DMT out of it. So that's how we know that Melosino, another key indication that he's smoking it, not Cagliostro's drinking it. They're clearly drinking something. It's a red liqueur on the master's altar. But Melosino, in his ritual, he says, now this is the burning coal that you read about in Isaiah. Well, if you look in Isaiah, an angel places a burning coal to his lips before he has his vision. You know, Melosino is saying, you know, once you get it out, you burn it, you smoke it. You put it on the pot of incense.
Well, how is he converting this green foam or whatever to something smokable? I mean, is there another step here?
Once you pipette that green top off and put it in a dish and leave it, it evaporates clean and leaves crystals behind. Those crystals are what you scrape up. That's the DMT, pure DMT crystals.
Wow. Is that the green lion?
Well, you know,
I don't know. I don't know enough about alchemy. You know, I'm asking some wild questions here.
The green lion technology existed before the Prima Mens technique. So if it did, it would indicate that the Prima Mens technique existed long before Paracelsus, and he just publicized it.
Interesting. So, okay, let's see. There was something else here I wanted to ask about this interesting book. Sorry, I have to move around. Okay. The La Très Sainte Trinosophie. La Très Sainte Trinosophie. It's French, I guess, right? Yeah.
So that book was in Cagliostro's possession when he was arrested. And later on, someone wrote Saint Germain's name on it. And for a long time, its authorship was attributed to Saint Germain. Years later, somebody else comes back and marks it out and puts, no, Cagliostro wrote this. So there's always been some debate, and you'll run into people like Manly P. Hall. You know, he believed that Saint Germain wrote it. I'm certain Cagliostro wrote it. Anyone who's read Cagliostro's ritual and sees his preoccupation with the acacia and producing something from this acacia, when you read La Très Sainte Trinosophie, it's an alchemical manuscript, so it's lusciously illustrated, great colors, you know, but it's also got text to it. And the text is talking about an old man handing this guy a crystal cup that's full of a shining liqueur that's the color of saffron, and he drinks it. And the old man tells him, don't stop, drink it all. So he drinks it all, and he says that, you know, immediately he felt stronger, and his intellect increased, and his bravery increased. You know, it's a drug. He said he felt it course through all the fibers of his being. Well, on that, the text, the thing about alchemical manuscripts is the text and the pictures rarely add up. They have nothing to do with each other in most cases for the common reader. They are connected, but it's up to you to find the lowest common denominator of those two ideas presented side by side. So next to that description of that shining cup is a picture of a bird with a sprig of acacia in his mouth. And it's being shown like the bird is holding it over a pot of incense that's on an altar. And it's a clear indication to me that Cagliostro is who's behind it. Not to mention it was in his possession when he was arrested. But And
so in this manuscript, is it a manuscript or a book?
It's a
small
book. Yeah, it's you can get copies of it on Amazon right now.
Yeah, no, it looks compelling. I mean, is it a pelican that's flying with the acacia sprig in its mouth? A pelican or some?
It is. I personally think that bird may be sort of a stereomorphized acacia sprig. If you look at his beak, it looks like a thorn. You know, his coloration is the same coloration you would expect from tree bark. You know, I wondered if it wasn't an indication of the tree itself.
Right.
With that very thorn-like beak.
But, and the idea of, you know, the bird sort of flying up in a sort of transitionary stage, and what's in its mouth, or what has it eaten that's caused it to ascend towards the heavenly realms, or whatever, to
Yeah.
have that,
And for
experience.
me,
But the acacia plant, right?
yep. And it's totally clear to me that the shining cup of crystal liqueur, the saffron hue from
Yes.
Trinosophie, is the same as the red liqueur on the master's pedestal in Cagliostro's ritual.
Awesome. I mean, in one of your articles, you actually give a section from this book. In section 6 of La Très Sainte
That's the
Trinosophie, the same wherein the bird and acacia appear, we read, "He handed me in a crystal cup of a shining liqueur of saffron hue. Its taste was delicious, and it emitted exquisite aroma. I was about to hand the cup back to him after moistening my lips in the liquor, when the old man said, 'Drink it all. It will be thy only nourishment during thy journeys.' I obeyed and felt divine fire course through all the fibers of my body. I was stronger, braver, even my intellectual powers seemed doubled." Okay, so he's taken something.
He
Clearly.
took something. Yeah, something.
Yeah.
And his description isn't too far off from what Cagliostro says in his ritual. He says, so that you will understand the following
Right.
ritual I'm about to give you. He's saying this is whatever you just took is going to change the way you hear what I'm about to say.
Yes. I mean, in a lot of ways, these psychedelics are giving us the ability, sort of catalyzing our ability to understand abstract, philosophical, spiritual, mystical concepts. And I feel that way for myself. It's definitely catalyzed those understandings for myself. I don't know if I would have come about to understanding what I do understand today if it wasn't for mushrooms, for example.
And that's the thing about it, is it's without logical deduction. You're not sitting there trying to arrive at a picture of what reality looks like. It hits you like they say,
like a revelation,
like a kick to the eye. It's like an aha moment. It's not. That's what's so just the clincher for me with psychedelics is that they appear to be communicating something that's not unique. It seems to be pretty similar across the board, and it's not something that we arrive at through deduction. That's it's just mind blowing. It's almost like the way Merker puts it is, it's not that it opens up something that you are thinking about. It opens up something you are thinking with. It changes the mechanism by which you are perceiving the world and yourself. It's not just one bifocal in here. There are levels to,
Yeah, and it reminds me of what you were saying about the brain scans, and that, that center area of your brain, that ego, sort of gets let go of during this experience, and some of the outer regions of your brain that don't normally connect, suddenly there's sparks coming between those areas of the brain. And I think it's when those sparks of those unique connections that occur just by the stimulation from the plant, that's where some of those insights are happening. Is in those connections, this idea with this idea, and then suddenly they just come together, and you're just like, oh my God.
It's just like the mystics always say, that you could have perceived the whole time, but you were in your way.
Yeah,
the only thing perception of absolute truth is you. Literally, your sense of self is the only obstacle.
It's true, and that needs to be sort of burned up, and I think some cultures talk about it in different ways. I know in Islam they talk about it as jihad, in fact, and a lot of people think of jihad as this outward battle or whatever against the non-believers. I think that's the ignorant interpretation, and unfortunately a lot of people do interpret it that way. But the true meaning of jihad in Islam is the internal alchemy, that transformation by struggle of life to improve yourself and overcome your dark side. That's the jihad, is to get yourself out of the way, get that ego out of the way, and let yourself just be godlike, which is your natural state.
Right.
I
like that.
Yeah, and I think in India they call it tapasya, right? Which is a Sanskrit term. I think that means the fire of purification. that comes about whether you're doing hatha yoga or prana yoga or kundalini yoga or bhakti yoga or jnana yoga, whatever the hell you're doing, whatever
Right,
practice you're doing. At the end of the day, you're trying to burn yourself out of the way,
right, right.
so that you can just be free and be a regular person.
Pretty
And get
profound.
rid of your habits of emotions and reactive patterns you may have, and fears and insecurities and all this crap that you think of as your personality, right?
Your tendency to react in
Yeah,
specific.
exactly. So I guess the last thing I wanted to ask you about was the connection to Pasqually's Cohens. I thought that was really interesting, in particular because I'm kind of researching the Cohen and the Martinez order currently, and I'm trying to learn more about that. When I saw you mention it there, I was like, "Oh, that's really interesting." And I think you mentioned something about incense they may have used during the degrees, or I don't
They
know.
did, according to
Yeah.
René Forestier, I think is how you pronounce his name.
Mm.
Their temple incense involved spore of agaric, and I interpret that to be probably Amanita muscaria mushroom spores.
Sure.
And it also included black and white poppy seeds. And poppy,
Interesting.
uh, I'm not too familiar on Papaver somniferum different strains, but the only seeds I've ever seen were whitish gray, and I wondered if the black ones weren't coated in opium, but that's just me speculating. But they did have
Right.
spore of in it, and according to another researcher, I want to say it, Christopher McIntosh in his Eliphas Levi and the French occult revival, but don't quote me on that because I might be
Mm.
wrong. Implied that they may have used hashish in their rituals, and there's
Mm.
heavy visionary elements. That the one of the things that you read about with Cohen were the luminous glyphs, the
Mm.
passes luminous glyphs that were supposed to pass before you if you were doing the ritual right. That sounds very visionary to me.
It
Luminous.
does. It does. Yeah.
And another thing that was la chose. La
La
chose means
chose.
the
Yeah.
thing,
La
and
chose.
it's never explained what the thing is.
Yeah.
But
La
Golly would
chose.
say, until you've seen la chose, you haven't had it. You haven't had the experience. Keep trying. And I guess if you came to him and told him what la chose was, and you were right, I suppose he would say, "That's it. You've had it." So
That's right.
we can't really know what it was. I don't think, but it was something. Tobias Churton interprets it as Sophia herself, absolute divine wisdom descending on the candidate, which is certainly possible. But
Hmm.
whatever that was, the luminous glyphs, the luminous passes to me has always screamed of a visionary experience.
No,
Now,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
granted, you don't have to have plants to have visionary experiences when you're using ritual and meditations. All that stuff can happen anyway, spontaneously, autonomously. But one of the things, you bring up Pasqually, and when you read that quote from Cagliostro, where he says that the primal matter was created and given to man, but he lost it. But it's
Right.
always been
He
and
lost it. He abused it or something, right? And
used.
then lost it. That made me think of drug abuse or whatever. I mean, could it have been that he overused it in recreational way and it wasn't a sacrament anymore? It wasn't
Possibly.
respected.
But when he
I don't
says that,
know. Yeah.
but that always existed in the hands of the elect of God.
Right.
Elect, I think Elu Cohen, the elect.
Well, the
You know,
elect of God, yeah, the elect priests. I mean, the
and
Kohanim are
if
the priests.
John Yarker insisted that Cagliostro's ritual was lifted wholesale from Pasqually.
Oh, really?
He didn't give evidence. He just insisted it was, and he said that. Also, he said based on the version of the ritual that was published in La Initiation, a French journal of the time, he said
Uh-huh.
if you compared them, I don't know what it was because I don't have that journal, but he said that if you compare those rituals, they're the same with the Elu Cohen.
Wow. Wow.
So
Wow.
we're the elect of God. Pasqually was in the Caribbean where they snuff yopo to this day, where the Anadenanthera colubrina trees that put out the yopo seeds to this day are used. So who knows?
Was he in Haiti? Pasqually?
Haiti. He died in Haiti,
Yes, he died in Haiti.
and it's
Yeah,
in and
yeah.
around where those trees thrive, and it's where they're still used.
Wow, that is fascinating. Well, thank you so much, brother. This has been awesome. This has been really cool.
I've had
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, me too. And I don't think either one of us in this conversation are trying to like promote that people, try these plants, these entheogens. That's a personal decision that people have to make if that's what they're seeking. And,
Yeah,
for me personally, what's that?
you knock at that door yourself.
Yeah, exactly. No one's going to pressure you, nor should anybody pressure anybody into something like that. But I think if you are looking for a really profound experience that's going to challenge you and make you think in new ways about yourself and the world and reality, and you're ready for that kind of a depth of experience, then perhaps. But it's powerful, and you have to come to it with reverence.
And there are legal avenues, so you can be sure to not be dealing with any kind of illegal activity, no jail time.
Yeah.
Consequence free. That's your watchword.
A good one. All right, brother. On that, thank you so much.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
I got a water cup here since it's the afternoon instead of the morning.
Yeah.
All right, bro. So we'll do it again. We'll continue the conversation.
Anytime.
All right, brother. Nice to meet you, by the way.
Likewise.
All right, cheers.